In 2023, with all the cameras, all the internet, social media, technology, do you feel like somebody could commit 30 murders and get away with it? With all the technology, all the cameras, all the social media?
Yeah. You just got to make sure when you start off on the jump, nobody sees what your face looks like. Nobody see you coming out of that. So when you go in, if there's cameras around you, you screwed. You got to find a place where there's nothing. The only do that at is in the woods. So you got to take yourself out in the woods, change your clothes, change your appearance, and everything you need. Then come around out the other end of that and go do what you got to do. You don't care about the camera because the camera ain't going to pick up nothing, but this, keep yourself taped up so they get no tattoos, no marks, no nothing. Keep everything taped up and ducked up. Cobra, so you can wear the mask. Cobra here, just put that mask on. They see nothing but that mask. You can put in work. You put in work, then you make sure you backtrack yourself the way you came. Reverse everything, leave all that stuff there, set it on fire. Make sure that that thing is in a person name that's dead. So it leads back to nowhere land. If you ain't gonna get it back in your stuff, ease back out. They still have nothing on that side to see you because you took it to an area where there's no cameras, just woods. You always go check out your route first to make sure that you got a clean getaway. Once you got a clean getaway, hey, it can be done.
That was a detailed account of how to commit a perfect hit from a seasoned hitman. Known to some as Boone, the Iceman or Grim Reaper. In his day, he was Detroit's most feared hitman, possibly ever. But lately, he has been a hot commodity of street/gang podcasts.
That's when I started my hustling, about 9.
For a man who claims over 30 murders, his story hasn't been made into a movie or even a Wikipedia page yet. He claims to have been offered movie rights for his story, but for free. Something he is completely opposed to, on top of a fear of being conned out of his story. The stories he tells of his life on the streets and in prison paint a picture of a demonic time in American history. And whether they are embellished or not, the man bears visible scars from his battles in the streets. They themselves telling a story of a man who has been through some shit. He claims to have been shot with an AK-47, a shotgun, a pistol, been stabbed and been tortured. He even shows his war wounds in some podcasts.
Did my arm, the AK went through here, ripped out that big bone. I lost a piece of bone. That's why my arm don't straighten up.
But multiple times he boasts with conviction that if you do not stop his brain, then you cannot stop him. As for the murders, he is completely remorseless when telling the stories, even adding a touch of comedy to the recountings. Anywho, here's the life and times of the criminal that other criminals feared, Nate Boone Craft. Nate Craft was born in the east side of Detroit in 1957, a tough neighborhood. He claimed his aggression comes from getting bullied in school a lot. He also asserts that he never had a concept of just fighting. If you fought him, one of you had to go. As for the nickname, it stemmed from his love of playing with knives since he was a kid, the Boone variety in particular. At a young age, he established that he didn't want to work all day like everyone in his household. He'd watch them come home tired and beat on a daily basis. Boone wanted easier money. He figured out heroin was the fastest way to get paid in his neighborhood, so he started selling at age 9 with his best friend Germ. He named his product Do Ti Die, meaning if you did it, you die, a name speaking to its potency.
We decided to change the name to Do to Die. Let people know you do this, you can die.
9-year-old Nate would sneak out of the house and sell drugs to retired veterans at night, and around the same time, young Boone's homicidal tendencies would begin to show. Boone hated being threatened more than most things. His response to any kind of threat was a 3-count warning, 1 for the slight and 2 for a repeat offense. You'd never hear the 3, you'd be dead. At age 10, Nate committed his first murder. After a threat, Nate killed his adult supplier, buried him in the backyard, and stole his whole heroin stash. He claims the body was poorly buried and stunk up the neighborhood after. The cops wound up finding it, but did little to investigate. A black homicide victim didn't warrant much effort back then. Around the same age, he also recalls almost killing his brother over stealing his money. His mom stopped him right as he pulled the trigger. Later on, he slashed a man's throat and killed him for messing with his sister. By now, he'd established that he'd only ever kill for free if it was about disrespect or his family. By his preteen years, he owned a car and would walk around in suits that he bought himself. He had no interest in normal kid stuff. Around the same time, Boone was sent to a youth home after a judge concluded that his mom had too many kids. Boone bounced around the foster care system for a few years until being kicked out for violent behavior. After, now age 16, he went back to Detroit, but he was homeless after being unable to find his family. He got to see the underbelly of Detroit firsthand. One time, he claims to have once seen a pimp hit a woman that was kind to him. When he stepped in to defend her, the pimp pulled out a knife. Boone shot him dead and threw him in a garbage bin. With nothing going on in his life, he decided to join the army, something he won't go into detail about. Whatever they trained him in would come in handy later in his hitman career. After the army, a robbery investigation ended when a gun left in his car that his brother had been using was found. The gun was used in the robbery, and Boone and his brother bore a striking resemblance. Boone wouldn't tell on his brother, so he went to prison for 4 years on the gun and robbery charges. In prison, Boone came to be known as the Iceman. He was feared for his cold demeanor and reputation for stabbing guards and inmates. A proficient hustler, Boone sold drugs, knives, food, run gambling tables, and even brought girls to the prison for other inmates. Prison did nothing to reform him, and on the day of his release, he taunted the guards by tearing up his coat and showing them the $72,000 he had made on the inside and stitched into his coat. After this, Boone became a bona fide contract killer.
More people under age 21 in Detroit have been shot in the first 10 months of 1986 than in all of 1985.
It was the 80s, and crack flooded the hood with fast cash, homicidal maniacs, inflated egos, and army-grade weapons. Boone's main motivation was money, but he had principles. He'd only ever accept hits on people involved in crime. Boone slowly became a master at his craft and worked his way up to charging $50,000 and up per hit. He offered special perks like torture, mutilation, and body part delivery too. On the job, Boone would study people's routines, watching them for days. And when he got the drop on them, he usually finished the job. He was so reliable that even cops would use him to do their dirty work. A few of Boone's MOs included doing hits on his own. Any partner was a potential future witness, leaving clues to throw off investigations to someone else, and making people disappear by putting them through a tree shredder and feeding them to pigs. He swears off pork to this day. Though he took great care to not get caught, people in the hood knew that a large man in a hoodie and glasses on their street meant someone was about to die. The Grim Reaper, they called him. On top of contract killing, he dabbled in loan sharking, and you guessed it, he killed anyone late on payments. He also worked for the Detroit Mafia. He'd personally torture people who didn't pay up on Mafia debts. He recalls threatening to pin people's eyelids back so they'd talk, and even bumping into someone he tortured years later in prison. During all this, the men who'd become Boone's most lucrative clients were on their own come-up, muscling their way for market share of what was shaping up to be Dope City. After an altercation that almost ended in a shootout, Boone, who had stepped in to defend his friend, was offered some cash to become a bodyguard for Maserati Rick, Detroit's top kingpin at the time. Richard Maserati Rick Carter Sr. grew up in post-industrial Detroit. He joined a car theft ring as a teen and spent ages 18 to 23 in prison for receiving stolen goods. He got out in 1982 and took up work as a towel boy for his childhood friend, boxer Tommy the Hitman Hearns. He later became his bodyguard. That same year, Rick would form a drug ring to push cocaine in the East Side, an opportune time given the conviction of Sylvester Seal Murray, a prominent Detroit kingpin. In 1985, he was joined by his longtime friend, Demetrius Meech Holloway. Rick and Meech's operation would grow to move drugs across the state of Michigan and all the way to Miami and LA. By '87, they were the main suppliers on the East Side. 80% of the coke in Detroit was attributed to both of them. Despite his preference for Mercedes, he got the nickname Maserati Rick at age 25 after buying a Maserati, the first black man in Detroit with one in a long time. In '85, Rick would hire the Brown brothers as muscle and hitmen. He kept them paid, armed, and lawyered up. The four Brown brothers, Ezra, Gregory, Reggie, and Terrence, were born between '62 and '68 and grew up in working-class East Detroit. They were physically imposing and all grew to at least 6'2", 230 pounds. They got their starts as low-level marijuana dealers in the '80s before graduating to contract murders for drug dealers. Though hiring them might have seemed like a good idea at first, they were both foolhardy and ambitious. By '86, a grift grew between Meech and the Brown brothers when he refused to let Rick introduce them to his supplier, a Colombian man known simply as Mike. Regardless, Rick and Mike later spoke and they agreed to do business with Terrence Brown for $150K up front. The Browns, who were now known as the Best Friends Gang, could now get in the coke game and push weight in Meech's territory. Best Friend members were anything but discreet. They were known for wearing large gold chains, driving exotic cars, and wearing jackets with Best Friends embroidered on the back. By the end of '86, the Best Friends gang had grown from 25 members to 50, including multiple notorious enforcers, most notably Boone. The Best Friends met Boone after watching him box in a Tough Man's contest. Boone claims to have fought and TKO'd Butterbean at one of these contests. This isn't verifiable online. After the fight, the Browns approached him, commending his fighting skills, and asked him if he wanted to work for them. Boone agreed. Boone would now be working with both Maserati Rick and the Best Friends. According to Boone, he was only ever loyal to whoever paid him most. Boone claims he would scare members of the Best Friends gang, many who had never been to prison, with prison stories about grown men being turned out. He encouraged them to shoot it out with the cops if they ever thought they'd get caught. It was a ploy, because this way, there wouldn't be anyone to snitch on him if they got caught. In the interim, Boone would also take on freelance side missions, most notably taking an alleged $125K hit from Detroit City Council President Gail Hill. The hit was on Richard Whiteboy Rick Wershey, a teenage informant who threatened to expose corrupt Detroit cops, but after multiple attempts including a drive-by, sniping him while he left the courthouse, sneaking Boone into the same prison as Wershey, and planning to hit a prison unit Wershey was moved to with rocket launchers. Wershey would be sentenced to life without parole before they could kill him. On the streets, the dope game was getting increasingly violent, and in December of '86, Ezra Brown was killed when he and Terrence, who survived the headshot, were shot in a drive-by. Ezra Brown was laid to rest 7 days later. That night, Gregory Brown was killed in a drive-by while walking on the East Side. He was still in the tuxedo he had worn to the funeral. Meech was suspected to have ordered both murders, and in retaliation, Terrence Brown put a hit out on Meech. After Gregory's death, Reginald and Terrence became more aggressive and set to take over the whole East Side. That meant a lot more killing. Reginald, known as Rockin' Reg, was the group's chief enforcer, a man Boone claims was crazier than him. He'd often get high and have Boone drive him around the West Side for random drive-bys. As for Maserati Rick, he'd made a lot of enemies over the years, with his gang rumored to have been involved in over 100 murders by then. His biggest rival was Big Ed Hansard, another kingpin on the East Side, and a former friend. It's rumored that the beef stemmed from a disrespectful remark. Big Ed is said to have claimed that his nickname was given to him by Rick's mother, and by '87, they were out to kill each other. Even with the help of Boone, at least 3 attempts at killing Big Ed failed.
Bannister ran through the back. That's the only reason why he survived, because I had shot at him, caught him in the top part of his
underarm because he was like this and his hat came off.
On September 10, 1988, after leaving his house quietly while his bodyguard Boone was asleep, Rick and Big Ed had a shootout at one of Rick's car washes. Rick was hit in the stomach and put in the hospital. No one involved in the shooting cooperated with the police. Boone would come to Rick's bedside, but so did Terrence Brown. The latter insisted that Boone leave Rick to recuperate and come work for them. Boone accepted.
Officials say 2 men were seen near his room when the shooting was discovered.
Really, we don't have a whole lot of details other than the fact that some people saw 2 men.
2 days later, a man would walk into Rick's hospital room, room 307, at Mount Carmel Mercy Hospital. The 29-year-old was officially pronounced dead at 6:01 p.m. from gunshots to the face. He was buried in a $16,000 Mercedes-themed coffin. To this day, Boone insists Terrence had Rick killed because they knew who his supplier was and didn't need him anymore. No one has ever been convicted for the killing. In the aftermath, Maserati Rick's crew split between his big brother Clyde and the best friends. Talks to make peace failed miserably. In October 1988, Boone was removed from the picture at a critical time when the gang war was getting ugly. After letting Terrence Brown use his car, Boone was randomly stopped by the police. They'd find drugs that Terrence had left behind in the ashtray of the car. Boone got locked up for 1.5 years for this. Reginald Brown would get life for a murder charge the same year as well, leaving Terrence to run the best friends. On September 17, 1990, Carter's brother Clyde and his girlfriend, Patricia Scott, were shot to death by an assailant after exiting his pickup truck with their 1-year-old son. The baby was unharmed. The next month, despite faking a kidnapping and hiding out in Las Vegas for a few months, Meach was shot to death while shopping in his favorite clothing store in downtown Detroit. For Boone, the final straw was his little brother getting killed while he was in prison. Word on the street was that Terrence allegedly gave Andre, Boone's brother, drugs to sell, but he kept the profits for himself. He figured his relation to Boone would shield him from any consequences. He thought wrong. Terrence had him killed anyway. When Boone pieced it together, he was furious. As revenge, he agreed to become a DEA informant. He confessed to all his crimes in exchange for immunity. Boone's cooperation was a huge deal because he was the only one of the best friends who was willing to testify. He would inform on 6 people responsible for killing his brother, people that he had planned to kill anyway. Boone got out in 1990, still fully intent on killing anyone involved in his brother's murder. Though they never knew that he knew about it, Boone never did get a clear chance at retribution. In July of 1991, Terrence Brown, suspecting that Boone was cooperating with the federal government, which he was, offered Boone 20 grand to kill a person who had murdered a best friend's member. Unbeknownst to Boone, the real plan was for both he and the rival to be killed. When Boone, Charles Chucky Doo Wilkes, and other members of the gang tracked the target down days later, the group opened fire on a taxi he climbed into and killed him. Moments later, Boone was also shot by his crew, but they ran off when they saw him raise his gun even after taking several shots. He was subsequently found, taken to a local hospital, and treated for multiple gunshot wounds. But because Boone's participation in the shooting constituted a violation of his parole, he was sentenced to 12 to 30 years in prison. Even with Boone out of the picture, the Best Friends operation wouldn't last much longer. In March 1992, a month after a successful appeal on his murder charge, an unmasked Reginald Brown casually walked up to the porch of an East Side home and started shooting. He killed 4 people in minutes. The motivation being that one of them had snitched on the Browns previously. Reginald stayed on the run till March 1993, when after tracking his phone, the feds spotted him and Terrence at a Benz dealership all the way in Manhattan. Reginald was caught, but Terrence escaped on a motorcycle and fled into a subway station. At 1 a.m. on August 9, 1993, in the parking lot of the Ramadel Renaissance Hotel in College Park, Georgia, police found a stolen GMC Yukon with Michigan plates. In the trunk, they found a body wrapped in a bedsheet and garbage bag. The man was wearing only a Shaquille O'Neal t-shirt and underwear. It was Terrence Brown. Brown, who hadn't checked into the hotel, was dead from a single gunshot to the head. Best Friends members Stacy the Machine Colbert and Charles Chucky Doo Wilkes are believed to have had Terrence murdered out of fear that he'd been planning to do the same to them. That was the end of the Brown brothers' reign of terror in Detroit. After 17 years, Boone was released in 2008 and moved back to East Detroit, where he lives under his real name. He has never been concerned about being labeled a snitch and dares someone to say it to his face. Reginald Brown, the last Brown brothers left, is still in prison to this day. Like many career criminals, Boone has made an assessment of the fruits of a life of crime, one that may seem trite, but is true nonetheless. There is no retirement from that life, and more so, there are no winners either, just convicts, dead people, and cripples.